Hi, I'm Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guy Segment Show. Also today in this segment, I'm at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad is located on N6639 Dilly Lake Road in Trego, Wisconsin. The railroad was founded in 1997 and it was originally located at the Spooner, Wisconsin depot. In 2013, it ended trips out of Spooner and moved to the present site in Trego, Wisconsin, where trains board these days. The Spooner Depot these days now houses the Railroad Memories Museum, and the line from Trego to Spooner is used for car storage these days. The railroad operates over 25 miles of a former Chicago and Northwestern railroad line between Trego and Hayward, Wisconsin, and it travels past several trees and a few different highways it parallels with as well. It runs several different kinds of trains, such as the dinner trains, bed and breakfast trains, and scenic excursion trains. And also, to find out more information on what trains there are to ride, feel free to browse the website for more information about that, and it tells you when operations are as well. In Hayward Junction is where interchanges are with the Canadian National Railroad. The railroad even services the pulpwood yard in Hayward just outside of Springbrook. Storing cars is a large revenue generator for the railroad. The railroad has added many locomotives and rolling stock to the roster for many years as well. And before the train enters Hayward, it crosses over the Namakagon River as well. What you see right behind me is Chicago and Northwestern 423. Chicago and Northwestern 423 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1949 and is the 8556th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is an F7 type diesel locomotive. It was originally built for the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad and originally was numbered 4076A, and it pulled passenger trains for that railroad for many years. In 1961, it was rebuilt for suburban service and was renumbered 423. Then in 1983, it was leased to the New Jersey Transit and kept the number. In 1985, it was soon retired. Then in 2001, it was bought by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin. Also, it was repainted to resemble a Great Northern paint scheme. Today, it is preserved at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad, and sometimes it is seen operating on the railroad and pulling the trains as well. What you see right behind me is Duluth and Iron Range 34. Duluth and Iron Range 34 was built by Pullman in 1912 and is a passenger coach. Also, the car is named Presque Isle. It was used on passenger trains for the Duluth and Iron Range Railroad for many years and carried people on board as well. Then, after the railroad's merger to the Duluth, Missabe, and Iron Range, it was numbered W34 as if it was used for maintenance of way service eventually. Then in 1965, it was put into maintenance of way use and used in wreck train service for the railroad. Then this car was retired, and in 1997, it was then acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it can be seen today. Today, it is preserved at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad, and sometimes it is seen rolling on the railroad as well. What you see right behind me is Duluth, Missabe, and Iron Range X7. Duluth, Missabe, and Iron Range X7 was built by Industrial Brown Hoist in Bay City, Michigan in 1941 and is a 250-ton crane. This crane was used for the Duluth, Missabe, and Iron Range Railroad for many years and was needed in case of train wrecks many years ago. It cleaned up wrecks for many years. It was originally built to run on steam and later converted to diesel power. Then it was retired and was acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today. The railroad also uses it to lift and lower heavy objects as well. What you see right behind me is Wisconsin Great Northern 12881. Wisconsin Great Northern 12881 was built by Pullman in 1914 and is an observation lounge car. Also, the car is named Alan Vreeland. This car was built originally for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad and originally was numbered 3217. This car was likely used on one of the passenger trains. In 1948, it was bought by the Seaboard Airline, but it was eliminated from having a number and was named Birmingham and was rebuilt into being a business car. Then, in 1953, it was renamed Southland. Then, in 1967, the Atlantic Coastline and Seaboard Airline merged to become known as the Seaboard Coastline, and the car kept the name. For many years, this car was used for executives when riding the railroad as a business car. In 1971, it was bought by Auto Train Company and numbered 1 and named Ronnie. It was sold to Carter Wire LLC and was renumbered 800,070, which was an Amtrak certified number, and was renamed Diane Marie. Then in 2011, it was sold to the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, and was renumbered 12881 and was given the present name. Also, it is sometimes seen at the back of passenger trains on the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad as well. What you see right behind me is Duluth and Iron Range 32. Duluth and Iron Range 32 was possibly built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1918 and is a passenger coach. Also, the car is named a postal aisle. This coach was used on the railroad for many years and carried people on board as well. Then, after the railroad's merger to the Duluth, Missabe, and Iron Range, it was then rebuilt into a crew car and was then renumbered W32. Then this car was retired and was then acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin. It was rebuilt into a buffet diner car as well. Today, it is preserved at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it can be seen today, and it is sometimes seen rolling on the railroad as well. What you see right behind me is Amtrak 39972. Amtrak 39972 was built by the Bud Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1956 and is a high-level lounge car. Also, the car is named Namakogon View. Originally, the car was built for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad and was originally numbered 577. This car was used on the El Capitan passenger train on the railroad for many years. In 1971, it was sold to Amtrak and was renumbered 9972 and was named Napa Valley. Later, it was renumbered 39972. In 2018, it was retired, and then in 2019, it was acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today. Also, it received the name for the car. Today, it is preserved at the railroad where it can be seen today and sometimes seen rolling on the railroad as well. What you see right behind me is Wisconsin and Southern 701. Wisconsin and Southern 701 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1952 and is the 169/90th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is a GP7U type diesel locomotive. Originally, it was built as a GP7 and was built for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, where it was originally numbered 2763. It also was used to pull freight trains on the railroads it served for many years. In 1974, it was then rebuilt by the railroad shops in Cleburne, Texas as a GP7U, where the nose would be chopped down halfway to the lower portion. Then it was sold to the Wisconsin and Southern Railroad in 1989, where it was renumbered 2001. Then it was renumbered 701 in 2014. Then it was retired from hauling freight. It was then purchased by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it can be seen today and is currently awaiting to be repainted into a livery for the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad and possibly to be given a different number as well.
What you see right behind me is Independent Locomotive Service 1387.
Independent Locomotive Service 1387 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1965 and is the 298 13th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is a GP35 type diesel locomotive. Originally, it was built for the Missouri Pacific Railroad and was originally numbered 633. It also spent many years pulling freight trains on the railroads it served as well. In 1974, it was then renumbered 2530. Then, in 1976, it was renumbered 2612. Then, in 1987, it was sold to Wilson Railway Corp. Later, it was sold to the Wisconsin Central Railroad, where it was renumbered 4008. As well as that, it was rebuilt as a GP35M. Then it was eventually renumbered 2056. It was then sold to Independent Locomotive Service, where it was renumbered 1387. Then it was moved to the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, sometime after 2020, where it is today, and it sometimes hauls the trains as well.
What you see right behind me is Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul 1114.
Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul 1114 was built by the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad shops in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1934 and is a baggage car. This car was used on passenger trains for the railroad for many years and was used on the Hiawatha passenger train as well and carried baggage and mail on board many years ago, and also it was equipped to handle baggage, express mail, merchandise, or similar products. Then in 1955, it was repainted yellow when it was used jointly by the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul, Union Pacific, and Southern Pacific between Chicago, Milwaukee, and the West Coast, and it took over joint operation of the Union Pacific City's passenger train into Chicago. Later, it was used in maintenance of way service on the railroad and was renumbered X917201. Then the car was retired and was soon acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin. In 2012, it was rebuilt into a power car for the train and was repainted into the scheme it is in to complement most of the red train cars as well. Today, it is part of the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today.
What you see right behind me is Duluth and Iron Range 112.
Duluth and Iron Range 112 was built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1911 and is a club car. Also, the car is named Richard F. Gilberg. Originally, this car was built as a baggage RPO car. It was used on passenger trains for the Duluth and Iron Range Railroad many years ago and carried baggage and mail on board as well. Then, after the railroad's merger to the Duluth, Missabe, and Iron Range, it was numbered W112 and was in maintenance of way use. Then this car was retired and it was then acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, and it was converted to being a club car. It was also given the name it has as well. Today, it is preserved here at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it can be seen today, and it is sometimes seen rolling on the railroad as well.
What you see right behind me is Canadian National 1341.
Canadian National 1341 was built by Pullman Standard in 1954 and is a diner car. It also contains a kitchen on board in one section of the car, as well as a dining room in the other section. For many years, this car was used on passenger trains on the railroad it was used by, and was also where people would have something to eat on board as well, and the kitchen is where the food would be prepared and cooked as well. Then the Canadian National Railroad passenger trains were handed over to Via Rail, which is Canada's national intercity passenger train that is similar to Amtrak. This car, along with the other cars in the passenger car fleet, was transferred to Via Rail, and the car kept the number as well. It was then retired and was then sold to Mid-America Rail Leasing Company. In 2016, it was then acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin. Then, about a couple of years later, it was refurbished on the interior and exterior and was soon put into service and was restored as well. Today, it is preserved here at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin. And also, it even travels with the excursion train down the line. And also, like the old days, food is also prepared in the kitchen for passengers as well.
What you see right behind me is Wisconsin Great Northern 100.
Wisconsin Great Northern 100 was built by Pullman Standard in 1937 and is an articulated coach. One car is known as Amnicon Falls, while the other is known as Manitou Falls. It was originally used by the Texas and New Orleans Railroad, subsidiary of the Southern Pacific Railroad, and one car was numbered 504 and the other 505. It was then used by the Southern Pacific Railroad, and car 505 was renumbered 2455 and car 504 was renumbered 2456. These two cars were once used on the Southern Pacific Daylight Limited passenger train and was painted in the Daylight paint scheme. The cars were then likely repainted silver and had a red stripe. In 1971, the car set was sold to Amtrak and car 2455 was renumbered 7524 and car 2456 was renumbered 7523. Then it was retired and it then went to the Wairika Western Railroad in California. Then about 1996, it was then bought by the Grand Traverse Dinner Train in Traverse City, Michigan. In 2006, it then sat in Owasso, Michigan. In 2007, it was then moved to Waterloo, Iowa. Then it was sold to the Central States Rail Associates Inc. in 2011. It was repainted blue for the dinner train and kept the numbers well. It was painted blue since the Wabash coaches fleet was painted blue, and it was used part of the dinner train over the former Wabash Railroad line in between Columbia and Centralia, Missouri. Then in 2014, after the Columbia Star dinner train shut down operations, the car was then sold to the Wisconsin Great Northern and was moved to Trego, Wisconsin in 2015, where it is seen today. In 2017, it was soon repainted red, and the entire car set shares the number these days as well. Also, it is sometimes seen rolling on the railroad as well.
What you see right behind me is Great Northern 1244.
Great Northern 1244 was built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1951 and is a ranch car. Also, the car is named White Pines Lake. It is one of only 6 that were delivered to the Great Northern Railroad. It saw service on the Empire Builder passenger train on the railroad. These unique cars were configured as coffee shop lounge with the interior decorated to represent a Western ranch house. Originally, decorations included peeled cedar logs, random width oak paneling, seats upholstered in pinto pony patterns, and red leather branding irons. It also featured 14 seats at the counter and 10 seats and a 12-seat dinette and 18-seat lounge. In 1967, it was repainted in the railroad's big sky blue and white paint scheme. In 1971, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Northern Pacific, Great Northern, and Spokane, Portland, and Seattle railroads merged to form the Burlington Northern Railroad. It was briefly painted in the Cascade Green and white hockey stick paint scheme. Then it was retired and it was bought by Arvid Benson. Then it was sold to Ralph Day in Biddeford, Maine, where it was going to be used as a restaurant. Then it was moved to Lewiston Junction, Maine. Then in 2006, it was then put on display at the Depot Event Center in Columbus, Ohio. Then in 2018, the depot was put for sale and this car had to be moved at some point. In 2023, it was bought by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin. It was carefully restored and was soon put in service on the railroad. Today, it is seen here at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad, but retains its Great Northern livery, and it also operates on the railroad as well.
What you see right behind me is Wisconsin Great Northern 9.
Wisconsin Great Northern 9 was built by American Car and Foundry in St. Charles, Missouri in 1949 and is a 6 double-bedroom lounge buffet car. Also, the car is named Namakogan Dreams. It was originally used by the Atlantic Coastline Railroad and was originally named Point Verda Beach. It spent many years being used on the railroad, and people would even spend the night on board a train when riding on board this car as well. It was also used on the Champion passenger train and the winter-only Florida special on the railroad. Then, when the Atlantic Coastline and Seaboard Airline merged in 1967, the railroad became known as the Seaboard Coastline, and the car gained a number which was 6605. Then, in 1971, when Amtrak was formed, it was bought by Amtrak and was renumbered 3225 and had its original name. It was later retired and was bought by the Great Lakes Western and kept the number and was repainted in a Chicago Northwestern scheme. It even operated in charter service on the back of Amtrak trains. In 2010, it was then bought by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad. About 2018, it was repainted and had a rebuild on the interior until later in 2019. As well as that, it was renumbered 9. Today, it is preserved here at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, and it is sometimes seen operating on the railroad's main line as well.
What you see right behind me is Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe 1622.
Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe 1622 was built by the Budd Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1950 and is a sleeper car. Also, the car is named Thomas C. Brady. Originally, the car was named Pine Cavern. This car is a 10-6 sleeper car, meaning it has 10 roomettes, 6 double bedrooms. For many years, people rode this car on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, and it was used for people to spend the night on board the train as well. In 1971, it was sold to Amtrak and was renumbered 2317. Then in 1977, it was converted to head-end power and was renumbered 2984. In 1995, it was retired and was subsequently sold to Wisconsin and Southern. Later, it was acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today. It was rebuilt with a lounge and dining room inside. In 2023, it was renamed to the present name and was rededicated to honor the late Monsignor Thomas Brady. Today, it is seen at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today, and sometimes can be seen rolling on the passenger train as well.
What you see right behind me is Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy 9903.
Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy 9903 was built by the Budd Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1935 and is a stainless steel Burlington Zephyr 5-car articulated passenger train. This passenger train is named the Mark Twain Zephyr. Originally, the passenger train was built with only 4 cars. The original cars on the train has names and numbers, and I will explain about the 5th car in a little bit and talk about how it ended up with the Mark Twain Zephyr. The locomotive is named Engine Joe, and it is the locomotive of the train and number 9903. Becky Thatcher, which is numbered 506, is the baggage car. Huckleberry Finn, which is numbered 551 and is the coach dinette car. And Tom Sawyer, which is 572, is the coach observation car. This train ran over a portion of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad between Burlington, Iowa, and St. Louis, Missouri. In 1958, it was retired and sat in storage in West Burlington, Iowa. In 1960, it was purchased by Charles Dashner of Glenwood, Iowa, and he tried to sell it to Cuba but couldn't because of rising tension over communism and the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was a plan to develop the train into a rail-themed restaurant and motel which would have been located on the I-29 and US 34 interchange. Before Charlie made the final payment on the train, he died in 1961, and it hasn't been moved, and it remained at the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy shops in West Burlington, Iowa. Then it was put for sale again. In 1962, the train was bought by Ernie Hayes of Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and it was soon moved there. It was kept at the Midwest Old Threshers grounds, which is in McMillan Park in the town. In 1968, Ernest donated the train to Midwest Old Threshers in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and it was closer to the Midwest Central Railroad there. Car 500, which is an extra car to the train and is the other coach dinette car and is named Effie Dean. It is the fifth car added onto the train. That car was originally part of the Pioneer Zephyr, which is on display at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, Illinois. When the Pioneer Zephyr was donated to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, it was figured, well, there was no room for the fourth car, so the Pioneer Zephyr was just shortened down to 3 cars. Instead, that car was given to the Mark Twain Zephyr. In 1972, the Mount Pleasant High School class of 1972 wrote the number 72 on the back of the Tom Sawyer car. In 1979, the train was badly vandalized and rocks were thrown at the windows and even china plates were destroyed. The Burlington Zephyr was then removed from Midwest Old Threshers. It was then sold to Alex Barquette, who planned to restore the Zephyr and possibly turn it into a tourist railroad that would carry passengers through Swope Park in Kansas City, but it sat on the siding on the southwest side of the city. Once it got to Kansas City, all 5 cars were connected to each other using the shared tracks. Almost immediately after purchasing the cars, they were moved to Mid-America Car Corporation, which is a business on the north side of Kansas City that had its own railroad yard and refurbished railroad cars. In 1988, it was bought by the 3 businessmen who formed the Mark Twain Zephyr Inc. They had hopes of teaming with the Coors Company, who they anticipated would pick the majority of the restoration costs as an exchange for the rights to lease the train for a period of time. Silver Bullet beer would be promoted by the marketing campaign. The discussion between the Coors Brewing Company and the Mark Twain Zephyr Inc. ended without an agreement. The 3 men decided to relocate it to where they lived, which it was moved to Joliet, Illinois. It was stored on various siding at the Joliet Army ammunition plant. There were plans about an idea to build the Mark Twain themed amusement park in Bettendorf, Iowa, a dinner train from Chicago to the Quad Cities, or a stationary restaurant and hotel in Downers Grove or DeKalb, Illinois. In 1997, it was then moved to Minooka, Illinois, and was stored at the Relco plant there. Toward the end of 2007, Relco decided to close down the Minooka plant, and the Mark Twain Zephyr Inc. had to find a new location to put it. In 2008, it was moved to Gateway Rail Services in Madison, Illinois, where it remained stored for years and standing off the shared trucks. Management was interested in potentially getting the contract on rebuilding the Zephyr, but the deal fell through. It remained gutted and windowless, and the train was just left untouched for years. In 2020, the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad bought the Zephyr. Semi-trucks moved all 5 cars, one per trailer, and the trucks all had to ride on one trailer. The plan was to restore it to operation on the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad. The FED was made as the museum car. The Mark Twain Zephyr finally had windows for the first time since the vandalism in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, and even had new floorings added, as well as new furniture. In 2023, it was placed back onto its trucks, and the locomotive body and cars behind it were all connected with each other for the first time in years as well. Today, it is preserved here at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today. Also, at the time I've made this video, the Zephyr is just 90% finished to being completed, and it should be in operation in no time.
What you see right behind me is Columbia Star Dinner Train 200.
Columbia Star Dinner Train 200 was built by National Steel Car Company in Hamilton, Ontario, likely in 1958, and is a baggage express car. Originally, it was built for the Canadian National Railroad and originally had a 9200 series number, which is unknown. Also, this car carried baggage on board many years ago. Later, it was renumbered 9618. This car was used on the railroad for many years when being used on passenger trains running through Canada. Then the Canadian National Railroad passenger trains were handed over to Via Rail, which is Canada's national intercity passenger train that is similar to Amtrak. This car, along with the other cars in the passenger car fleet, was transferred to Via Rail as well. Then it was retired, and then about 1996, it was bought by the Grand Traverse Dinner Train in Traverse City, Michigan. In 2006, it then sat in Owassa, Michigan. In 2007, it was then moved to Waterloo, Iowa. Then it was sold to the Central States Rail Associates Inc. in 2011. It was repainted blue for the dinner train and kept the number as well. It was painted blue since the Wabash coaches fleet was painted blue, and it was used part of the dinner train over the former Wabash Railroad line between Columbia and Centralia, Missouri. Then in 2014, after the Columbia Star Dinner Train shut down operations, the car was then sold to the Wisconsin Great Northern and was moved to Trego, Wisconsin in 2015, where it is today.
What you see right behind me is Wisconsin Great Northern 300.
Wisconsin Great Northern 300 was built by Pullman Standard in 1941 and is an articulated coach. One car is known as Copper Falls while the other is known as Morgan Falls. It was originally used by the Texas and New Orleans Railroad, subsidiary of the Southern Pacific Railroad, and one car is number 2463 and the other is 2464. These two cars were once used on the Southern Pacific Daylight Limited passenger train and was painted in the Daylight paint scheme. The cars were then repainted silver and had a red stripe. In 1971, the car set was sold to Amtrak and car 2464 was renumbered 7529 and car 2463 was renumbered 7528. Then it was retired and then it went to the Wairika Western Railroad in California. Then about 1996, it was bought by the Grand Traverse Dinner Train in Traverse City, Michigan. In 2006, it then sat in Owassa, Michigan. In 2007, it was then moved to Waterloo, Iowa. Then it was sold to the Central States Rail Associates Inc. in 2011. It was repainted blue for the dinner train and kept the number as well. It was painted blue since the Wabash coaches fleet was painted blue. and it was part of the dinner train over the former Wabash Railroad line between Columbia and Centralia, Missouri. Then, in 2014, after the Columbia Star dinner train discontinued operations, the car set was then sold to the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad and was moved to Trego, Wisconsin in 2015, where it is seen today. It was soon repainted red about 2018. Also, it is sometimes seen rolling on the tracks as well.
What you see right behind me is Wisconsin Great Northern 1386.
Wisconsin Great Northern 1386 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1964 and is the 28779th diesel locomotive built by that factory and is a GP35 type diesel locomotive. This locomotive was originally used by the Texas and Pacific Railroad and originally was numbered 607. It was likely used to haul freight cars for the railroad for many years. In 1974, the Texas and Pacific was acquired by the Missouri Pacific Railroad and it was renumbered 2507 and it was renumbered 2507. Then in 1976, it was rebuilt as a GP35M and was renumbered 2605. Then in 1987, it was sold to Wilson Railway Corp. Later that year, it was sold to Wisconsin Central and was renumbered 4003. Then it was renumbered 4013 to make place for an SD40. It was rebuilt and renumbered 2061. Then it was retired and was sold to Independent Locomotive Service in Becker, Minnesota, and was renumbered 1386. In 2018, it was acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is seen today and can sometimes be seen pulling the trains as well.
What you see right behind me is Wisconsin
Central
6006.
Wisconsin Central 6006 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1973 and is the A2957 diesel locomotive built by that factory and is an SD40-2 type diesel locomotive. Originally, it was built for the Algoma Central Railroad and originally numbered 188. For many years, this locomotive was used to be seen pulling freight trains for many years. In 1990, it was sold to the Wisconsin Central Railroad and was renumbered 6006. Then the locomotive was retired and in 2018, it was then acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today and can sometimes be seen pulling the trains as well.
What you see right behind me is Wabash 1950.
Wabash 1950 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1950 and is the 110/73rd diesel locomotive built by that factory and is an F7 type diesel locomotive. This locomotive was never actually used by the Wabash Railroad. It was originally built for the Great Northern Railroad and originally numbered 364A. It was used to haul trains for many years on the railroad. In 1970, when the Great Northern, Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, Northern Pacific, and Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railroad merged to form the Burlington Northern. In 1976, it was then renumbered 704. In 1980, it was then sold to the Seattle and North Coast Railroad, where it was renumbered 103. In 1984, it was sold to the Iowa Northern Railroad and kept the number. In 1990, it was bought by the Great Traverse train in Traverse City, Michigan, and was renumbered 1950. In 2006, it then sat in Owasso, Michigan. In 2007, it was then moved to Waterloo, Iowa. Then it was sold to the Central States Rail Associates, Inc. in 2011. It was also repainted in a Wabash livery and was soon used by the Columbia Star Dinner Train in Missouri. It was repainted to look like a Wabash diesel for the dinner train and kept the number as well. The locomotive sports the scheme since it hauled the dinner train over the former Wabash line between Columbia and Centralia, Missouri. Then, in 2014, after the Columbia Star Dinner Train shut down operations, the locomotive was sold to the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad and was in Trego, Wisconsin in 2015, where it is seen today. It still retains the Wabash livery, and also it is preserved here, and sometimes it is seen pulling the train as well.
What you see right behind me is Wabash 1951.
Wabash 1951 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1953 and is the 178/52nd diesel locomotive built by that factory and is an F7 type diesel locomotive. This locomotive wasn't actually used by the Wabash Railroad. It was originally built for the Great Northern Railroad and originally numbered 464A. It was used to haul trains for many years on the railroad. In 1970, when the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, Northern Pacific, Spokane, Portland, and Seattle, and Great Northern Railroads all merged to form the Burlington Northern Railroad, it was renumbered 684. In 1981, it was then sold to the Seattle and North Coast Railroad, where it was renumbered 102. In 1984, it was sold to the Iowa Northern Railroad and it kept the number. In 1966, it was then bought by the Great Traverse Train in Traverse City, Michigan, and was renumbered 1951. In 2006, it then sat in Owasso, Michigan. In 2007, it was then moved to Waterloo, Iowa. Then it was sold to Central States Rail Associates, Inc. in 2011. It was also repainted in a Wabash livery and was soon used by the Columbia Star Dinner Train. It was repainted to look like a Wabash diesel for the dinner train and kept the number as well. This locomotive was painted in a Wabash scheme as a tribute to the Wabash Railroad since it ran over a former Wabash Railroad line with the dinner train between Columbia and Centralia, Missouri. Then in 2014, after the Columbia Star Dinner Train shut down operations, the locomotive was then sold to the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin in 2015. Also, it retains its Wabash paint scheme, and also it is preserved here at the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad and sometimes operates by pulling the trains as well.
What you see right behind me is Soo Line 985-353.
Soo Line 985-353 was built in 1941 and is a flat car. It spent many years on the Soo Line Railroad and was used on freight trains for many years when it was used by that railroad. Then it was likely put into maintenance of way service, and if so, it may have kept this number. Then later on, the car was retired, and then it was acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today. And sometimes it can be seen rolling down the tracks and is likely used for maintenance of way use as well.
What you see right behind me is Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific 3499.
Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific 3499 was built by Pullman and Standard in 1949 and is a sleeper car. Also, the car is named Royal Palm. It was used by the Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific Railroad, which is a subsidiary of the Southern Railroad. It was used on passenger trains, and people would even spend the night on board it as well. The car was soon used by the Southern Railway, but kept the number. Then, when the Southern Railroad and Norfolk and Western Railroad merged to become the Norfolk Southern Railroad in 1982, and the car was then renumbered 16. In 1994, it was sold, and in 1995, it was purchased by Royal Rail Gold Coast Limited and was renumbered 800,347, which is an Amtrak certified number, and was given the name to what it is as well. Then in 2014, it was acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today. Sometimes it is seen rolling on the rails as well.
What you see right behind me is Wisconsin Great Northern 24.
Wisconsin Great Northern 24 was built by the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad shops in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1947 and is an RPO car. This car was built for the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, and as I said, this car is home built. This car is a home built car because it was originally used by the railroad that built this car. It was built as a baggage RPO car, where one section would be used for sorting mail and the other is where baggage would be kept when people would go for rides on trains. It was originally numbered 1223. Later, it was rebuilt to being a straight railway post office car and was renumbered 2161. Then in 1955, it was repainted yellow when it was used jointly by the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, Union Pacific Railroad, and Southern Pacific Railroad between Chicago, Milwaukee, and the West Coast, and it took over joint operation of the Union Pacific City's passenger trains into Chicago. Then it was retired and was likely stored away somewhere. It was then vandalized and the windows were shattered. Then it was acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today. It was eventually restored inside and out and was given a red coat of paint, and it was given the number 24. Also, it has Christmas decals on the sides because this car is used during the holiday season for the pizza train as well.
What you see right behind me is Chicago and Northwestern X250 578.
Chicago and Northwestern X250-578 was built somewhere in the 1900s and is a flat car. The original number of this car could be unknown. It may have possibly been built as a boxcar for the Chicago Northwestern Railroad, or just built as a flat car many years ago and would be used on freight trains for many years when it was used on the railroad as well. If what I think might be true, that it was built as a boxcar, it would have later been rebuilt as a flat car. Then it was likely put into maintenance of way service and was renumbered X250-578. Then later on, this car was retired and it was then acquired by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, where it is today, and sometimes it can be seen rolling on the tracks and is likely used for maintenance of way use as well.
What you see right behind me is Texas Electric 316.
Texas Electric 316 was built by St. Louis Car Company in St. Louis, Missouri in 1913 and is a motor car. Also, the car is named Madeline. It was originally built as a combine car and was built for the Southern Traction Company, and this is the original number. In 1916, the Southern Traction was purchased by Texas Electric, which the car was soon used by that railroad. Also, it was rebuilt as a motor car. Then, in 1948, it was retired and was sold into private ownership and was used as a cabin on the ranch near Fort Worth, Texas. Then in 2008, it went under an extensive restoration and was restored. Then in 2008, it was acquired by the Bay Creek Railway and used for the dinner train. Then it was bought by the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad in Trego, Wisconsin, and was named Madeline and was given the name. Today, it is sometimes seen operating on the Wisconsin Great Northern Railroad, where it is preserved today.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed learning about trains with me today in Matthew Lapp Train Guy segment show. Also, I hope to see you all again in the next segment. And if you didn't subscribe to my channel yet, the subscribe button is just down below the video screen. And if you didn't give the Facebook page a like yet, here's where you'll want to go. And if you didn't give the Instagram page a follow yet, here's where you'll want to go as well. Also, be sure to get your merch at teesprings.com. Link is in the description box below, along with the Facebook and Instagram pages. And remember to subscribe to the Train Guy. So this is Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guy segment show. Sign out until next time. All aboard!